I am not and never have been a fan of your chief sports writer. He pontificates and is always in full holier-than-thou mode throughout his overlong, wordy columns. I don't care a toss about whether or not we allow an England football team to play in the World Cup in Russia. But I do not need his column to be used to spread his political prejudices. His comments about the Conservative Party on March 13 are outside his remit, and the proprietors of your fine newspaper should tell this egotist to keep out of politics because they are too grown up for people like him. You indulge Mr. Samuel far too much, and now is the time to rein him in. Terry Lane, Aylesbury. As I've always said, snowflake in its modern judgmental sense is a word I hate, but in my experience the biggest are always on the right. What a strop over a 47-word item, Mr. Lane. Overlong, ha. Pointing out the irony of Conservative members pushing for a boycott of the World Cup, when the party has received £3 million in donations from Russian associates since 2010, which it has no intention of returning. I've never been one who thinks politics should be kept from sport, but I do rather feel people who cannot vote in our elections should be stopped from boosting our political parties financially. I don't think it needs a grown-up like your good self to explain why. On a similar note, I saw Chris Bryant was calling out Jose Mourinho for his contract with Russia today on Tuesday, but will he be asking his party's leader, Jeremy Corbyn, about his own appearances for the broadcaster, if he was paid, and whether he will be returning any fees? You see, Mr. Lane, it's not the Conservative Party per se I do not like, just the hypocrisy of politicians of any hue expecting sports people to adhere to higher standards than those in industry, or parliament. I'll support a World Cup boycott if it is joined by economic and trade sanctions, too, just as I'd find your criticism less risible if I was not childish one minute, and too wordy for you the next. And I don't know what side of the Conservative Party you are on, although I'll hazard a guess, but, on Russia, you might want to consider this: a nation is far stronger in an alliance of 27, than it is standing alone. So while you may think I am not old enough to engage in politics, I do know bullies. And they don't tend to pick on the lad with 27 mates walking down the road, it's the one taking the lonely walk home alone that is vulnerable. And on that logical bombshell, something very worthy for the regulars before we crack on with 5 points. You won't like this at all, Mr. Lane, but it's what happens when musical geniuses play verbal games with poets. Point 1, leave cycling to the experts. After all, it's worked so well so far. Martin, you nor your paper have ever had any interest or knowledge of cycling, so leave your views to people who do. Stick to your utterly mundane articles about where Manchester United players go for supper, and leave comment on a sport of which you have no credible understanding to people who actually care for it, please. Eric 53, Walton-on-Thames. Eric, you are correct. Cycling isn't my sport because I've always struggled to trust it. In this job, however, you spend a lot of time writing, not about Manchester United players' dining experiences, but about the issues that swirl around cycling: ethics, morality, where the lines are, how far it is right to go in the pursuit of victory, faith in individuals, the pursuit of excellence. So in those fields I'm qualified to comment, having been at this for more than 3 decades now. As for the paper and its interest in your sport, I would back my colleague Matt Lawton against anybody, including you. It is precisely because he is so sincere in his love and understanding of cycling that he has led the way in recent years, breaking stories on people I know for a fact were his friends. He also feels very strongly about athletics, which he was very good at, too. Matt is a quite brilliant journalist, and, frankly, how he doesn't sweep the board at the press awards each year I do not know. Martin Samuel is quick to condemn the whole of cycling as a tarnished sport, yet not one single mention of West Ham, Manchester City and Bournemouth failing the Football Association's anti-doping whereabouts system. Double standards rule, eh Martin? Eric 53, Walton-on-Thames. Oh, you again. No mention of the anti-whereabouts issues in football? What, apart from the lead in the column 14 months ago? Far from not mentioning it, I made it the main item and advocated a hard disciplinary line. So no double standards at all. You just haven't done your research, read, or thought about the subject enough before typing your little pool of dribble. Pedal away, Eric. Point 2, to boycott, or not to boycott? That is the question. Glad to know you won't be frequenting Russia this summer then, Mr. Samuel. Glenhoe 95, Londonderry. Are you going, Martin? Billed Brad, Preston. Of course I'm going. It's my job, I don't get a say in the matter. If the newspaper said it wasn't sending to Russia on a point of principle, then I wouldn't go. Equally, if British journalists are banned as retaliation over sanctions against Russia today, then I can't go. But all things being equal, I will travel to Russia because that is what I am paid to do, Cover major sport. And the World Cup is major sport, no matter where it is held. Do I think the tournament should have gone to Russia? No. And I have made that clear over many, many years, but that isn't the point. I can think of a lot of venues, locations as well as countries, that I felt were poor choices to host events, but that doesn't excuse me from covering the tournament. I'm not there for a jolly, I'm not there because I enjoy spending weeks on end away from my family, although I've always accepted that comes with the territory. I'm there because it's what I do. Were England to boycott, there would still be a decision to make, because the rest of the world are there and it's still a World Cup. Would I advise England fans to travel in the present climate, mind you? That would be no, too. Martin, according to you, are there any positives for holding the World Cup in Russia? We have had enough of negativity in the press and this won't stop Russia hosting the event. Yusuf 8187, Mumbai. Positives? Let me see. The World Cup has never been held in the east of Europe before. That's it, I'm afraid. Although if it going east, I can think of many better places. Clacton, for instance. How is us not playing in the World Cup punishing Russia? If the whole of Europe agreed to boycott, maybe. Stevie J 99, Colchester. I'd call it a post-Brexit decision, Stevie, in which we imagine we're considerably bigger players on the global scene than we are. Point 3, Wolves actually have a plan that works. Is that allowed? Is part of the complaint against Wolves not the fact that their owners, Fosun International, have a financial stake in Jorge Mendes' agency, Just Chifote? Doesn't this financial link between club and agency take the situation past simply being about taking advantage of good contacts? Ramsey 18, Aylesbury. Not unless Just Chifote are actually influencing team selection, Ramsey. Clubs have links with other clubs, or particular agents, and there is no problem unless they exert third-party control. If Mendes was saying his clients have to play, although some loan transfers stipulate appearances, so there is inconsistency there, then that would constitute third-party interference. If both sides are making use of their business links for mutual benefit, then there is nothing underhand as far as I see. I agree that Wolves haven't broken any rules, and the protests from the other clubs appear to be sour grapes. However, when Watford also broke zero rules by obtaining a number of players on loan from Udinese and Granada due to the owners only having just taken over and not having the necessary time to complete permanent transfers, proven by the fact they went on to sign them the following season, you were highly critical, and were in agreement with the Football League's decision to change the rules afterwards so no other club could do the same. I would love to know your reason for stating that one club have ambition and wit when searching for ways to achieve promotion, but another club were ruthlessly exploiting a loophole and shouldn't be allowed to get away with it. Seems you've changed your tune over the last few years, or your opinion is influenced by whether or not you like the club in question. Rob, London. That's right, Rob, I've got it in for Watford. As can be seen by the many times I've written negatively about them since. So let's return from La La Land to reality. The Pozzo family arrived here with a business plan that was built on switching players using loans between their many clubs throughout Europe. That is a threat to the integrity of competition if allowed unchecked. Sure, Watford were unlikely to come across Udinese or Granada anytime soon, but what if another company adopted that model with clubs that could meet in European competition? The Pozzo plan could have been the thin end of a very dubious wedge. Also, you forget that Watford were not at the top of the Pozzo food chain back then. As a championship club, there was a danger they could have become a dumping ground for some ordinary players on the books elsewhere, as happened to Charlton after the Roland Duchâtelet takeover, with homegrown players, young players, British players, suddenly finding their way blocked. That is no longer an issue because Watford are in the Premier League and, one imagines, generating more money than the Pozzo family's other interests, so they get the pick of the bunch. But it was different, back then. Finally, the idea the Pozzo family had to bring in all these loan signings is a myth. It takes as long to do a loan as a permanent deal and, anyway, Watford weren't doing badly under their previous manager, Sean Dyche. It wasn't as if the club was in crisis at the bottom, or had only 10 fit players available. It wasn't a temporary measure, it was a strategy and would have continued had the Football League and Premier League not wisely changed the rules around loan signings. That Watford made loans permanent is not proof of anything. They had to do that to comply with the changed regulations. So I haven't changed my tune in the least. What happened at Watford back then was wrong, and very different to the situation at Wolves. As long as they don't break financial fair play rules, like Bournemouth and Leicester did to get promotion, then there should be no problems. However, if they do, the complaints are valid. Banana Man, Nottingham. Well, valid by the letter of the law. Valid in terms of being legitimate, but I don't agree with them. Given the level of parachute payments, The Football League's FFP rules are a joke, a tax on ambition and inherently unfair. Spend what you like to get out, as long as it is given in the form of investment, not a loan. Leicester delivered the greatest story in the history of football, and Bournemouth's achievement and open style of play in the Premier League is a delight. And to think small men with small minds might have deprived us of that. Then again, some small things are quite beautiful. Like this. It's not just Leeds who have complained to the Football League. Aston Villa and Derby, who are both in the top 6, have too, but Samuel chose to ignore that until the Leeds chairman made his comments because it didn't fit his narrative. Typical hater. Dodgy Derek, West Yorkshire. That's right, Derek, I've got an in for Leeds, as well as Watford. It's very exhausting keeping track of all these clubs I'm meant to hate. I think I'll have to make up a chart to remind myself. Ooh, 10 past 10. Got to remember to hate Leeds for the next 20 minutes. Other clubs complained about Wolves, yes, but kept quiet publicly. Your chairman went on Twitter shortly and moaned in the most ridiculous fashion. That's why I based the column around his comments. Point 4, Bubbles, blown. A big part of match day at Upton Park was to have traditional pie mash and liquor at Nathan's in Barking Road or Joe's in Hoxton. Moving to the London Stadium, we now have a company from the north trying to replicate this historic London dish. According to most fans, it is unauthentic and the liquor is thick and tasteless. Surely West Ham could have found somebody local to provide authentic pie, mash and liquor to the thousands of West Ham fans. Sally Jane, Felixstowe. Or if you hadn't fled to Felixstowe, Sally, you could have the historic dish of pie, mash and liquor every day in the good old East End. That was your choice, though, moving, and it really isn't up to the club to feed your nostalgia for a London you left behind. As I said, Upton Park served as the last link to an East End that had been deserted, but the supporters expect the football club to continue feeding these rose-tinted memories. Joe's in Hoxton, by which I take it you mean F. Cook's, which is fronted by Joe at 150 Hoxton Road, is actually 6.1 miles away from Upton Park and 3.3 miles away from Stratford. So if that's your poison, what's the problem? There is no way Joe's was a part of a ritual based around walking to Upton Park anyway. It's got an N1 address, for heaven's sake. Nathan's, obviously, was next to the ground. But Cook's? It's nearer to Arsenal. More East End mythology. People want nothing to have changed for when they pop back from Suffolk every 3 years. So, Sally, if the height of your group's worries is that the liquor is too thick on the pie and mash at the new place, it really isn't a bad old life. And, more seriously, do you know how trivial and whiny this looks to the supporters of, say, Sunderland, Coventry or Blackpool? No wonder West Ham aren't getting a whole heap of sympathy. West Ham fans can moan about how the stadium is not a football stadium, but if they had any sense of pride they'd crank up the volume on their chanting and make it a cauldron. The fact that they can't says more of the fans than it does the ownership. As for the owners, they had this coming when they hired David Moyes, a man who is on the verge of taking 2 clubs down in successive seasons. Ngemackham, New Jersey. The atmosphere was fine when West Ham defeated Tottenham last season. I'm not about to blame the fans for failing to make enough noise, when they have been given so little to cheer about, but I have been to Napoli's home ground where a running track and a concrete bowl is no obstacle to one of the most raucous, intimidating stadiums in Europe. I'm not saying it is easy, but it can be done, and West Ham's fans have on occasions proved that. I think they may do again when Southampton visit on March 31st. I feel the majority now believe they get behind the team, or go down. As you sow, so shall you reap. The smug, dishonest arrogance you displayed when your club entered into this preposterous and unworkable arrangement for the use of an athletics stadium for football, the only game in town, you claimed, which was a lie, makes the inevitable and totally avoidable disaster give off a delicious sense of schadenfreude to those of us who knew that really the only game in town was demolishing the stadium, moving athletics to a purpose-built venue at Crystal Palace and building a football stadium in its place. That common-sense approach was eschewed for no good reason. Your comments suggest you still hold out hope that West Ham may be able to do just that by substituting a revamped Commonwealth Games stadium in Birmingham for Crystal Palace, with West Ham getting further subsidies from the taxpayer to get them out of the hole they built for themselves while cheered on by hacks like you. The world does not owe West Ham a living, or even an existence. John White, 4198, London. While we're on the proverbs, let he who is without smug cast the first stone. Blimey, you're pleased with yourself, mate. Anyway, let's wind that clock back to 2012. The London Olympics has just finished. The country is, briefly, united in optimism and cheer. It has enjoyed arguably the greatest night in its sporting history, Super Saturday, with 3 gold medals in track and field for Great Britain. And as the last closing ceremony firework fades in the night sky, and the greatest Olympics of the modern age is celebrated and saluted, a voice can be heard. Right, pack up quick lads, the bulldozers are in tomorrow to knock this place down for Tottenham. There would have been riots in the streets, John. Daniel Levy would have been the most hated man in Britain, not just by his own fans, who rightly didn't want to move to Stratford, but by the country for destroying an iconic venue, the home of heroes. It's easy to forget, almost 6 years and a series of calamitous political decisions later, how the country felt in 2012. West Ham was the only game in town, because it was the only tenant that was promising to maintain a stadium for athletics, underpinned by regular use from football. Now, with distance, the logic of knocking the place down, building anew and shunting athletics to Crystal Palace can be seen, and the glow of 2012 has faded, but at the time it would have been a hugely unpopular decision. Personally, I consider the best option an athletics stadium converted to football post-2012, as happened in Manchester after the Commonwealth Games, but this was the one route that could never be considered due to the demands of Lord Coe, Ken Livingstone and Tessa Joel. The stadium had to have an athletics legacy, on site, that was the promise. So it's all very well talking with 6 years of smug hindsight, but that really wasn't the scenario at the time. West Ham was the best option, and still is, if certain accommodations can be made. And who does Martin suppose should pick up the bill for the proposed remodel of the London Stadium? Johnny Taxpayer again? Zero sympathy for West Ham and their supporters from me. Zach, Sheffield. West Ham, of course. The more the club pays, the more control it is entitled to, the less it hears from people like your good self. No offense. Well, now you are contradicting yourself. When West Ham had newly moved into the stadium and the fans were complaining about results, you said the stadium wasn't the problem. Now you say it is. Teop, London. I didn't say it was a problem with the results, I said it was a problem because some fans have taken against it so extremely. The results aren't down to the stadium. If you look at West Ham's away form, and the season as a whole, it is not the fault of the London Stadium that they lost 4-1 at Swansea or 4-0 at Everton. When West Ham bid against Tottenham for the Olympic Stadium, they insisted they could coexist with athletics. This was the fundamental reason they were awarded a national stadium at a fraction of the cost. If the plan is now to renege on that, as Mr. Samuel is indicating, they should be forced to buy the stadium outright at full market value, plus compensate athletics for evicting them and destroying the legacy of the 2012 Olympics. LDN 2018, London. Athletics will have a 50,000 capacity stadium in Birmingham after 2022. How many giant arenas does a sport that has about 4 big days a year, tops, need? Love that fans kid themselves about how they support their club. Newcastle fans are famous for it, and were the subject of a Samuel article not all that long ago, and now West Ham fans are doing it too. It's like fans believe that because they support what they think is the best club, then their support for that club must be the best, too, and no one else could possibly understand their support, because if they did then they'd also support that team. Well, no, everyone supports their team with the same passion, maybe it comes out in different ways, but it's still there. Any fan who says you just don't get it when a journalist or neutral disagrees is missing a possibly helpful opinion. Loro Palmer, Leatherhead. Or certainly a more balanced perspective. I agree there, Loro. Sometimes you can be too near a subject, feel it too passionately or romantically. That does not mean Newcastle or West Ham fans should not feel these strong allegiances, or hold these strong views. But if you are in tears or apoplectic with rage because the liquor on your pie is too thick, or a club that historically doesn't finish in the top half of the table isn't in for Robert Lewandowski, you may need to chill a little. The stadium holds 20,000 more than Upton Park. Those people couldn't attend matches in the past. They are pleased that West Ham have moved. Don't be fooled by the noisy minority. The silent majority, including me, are very happy about moving to the London Stadium. If we were winning, then everything in the garden would smell of roses. That is how shallow the problem is. DG, London. I don't disagree with that, DG. There will always be people who will miss the earthiness of Upton Park, but there was no dissent when West Ham beat Chelsea at the new place this season. I do think much of this is about the perfect storm of the move coinciding with a failing, underachieving, team. Get on with it. You're not going back to Upton Park and, yes, the stadium isn't yours and isn't even a football stadium, but make the best of it. No. Your board won't spend any money but then get behind what you've got. I'm an Arsenal fan and it's not that much better at our place, considering what we were used to. You look shallow and there's a minority of fans that are tarnishing what West Ham truly stand for. Mark Noble is what your club is all about. Stop bleeding. Meldrew, Leon C. Vic, I don't agree that fans just have to suck it up in silence, but I certainly agree with your last statement. Mark Noble is more of a West Ham man than Julian Dix, Paolo Di Canio, or any of these populist legends will ever be, and it is a real pity that he was placed in the position where he was throwing his own fans off the pitch. Incredibly, some thinks this makes him a company man. It doesn't. It makes him a guy who sincerely wanted to win a game of football for his club, and could see the way it was going. His legs might not carry him around as they used to, but his heart is most certainly in the right place. Do you not think fans at other clubs such as Stoke and West Brom feel the same? If only we had bought some decent players. In my opinion, each and every club believes stronger activity in the transfer market will improve the overall quality of the playing staff. The fact is there are too many mediocre players out there, and all believe they are more than decent. Hey, I'm a Manchester United fan and believe me, the great Sir Alex Ferguson himself didn't always get it right. Yet another one, Guam. I agree. I do think there is a danger of West Ham's protesting fans looking spoiled with this "we were sold a dream / spent some effing money" stuff. I do think the move is not as advertised as far as its benefit to the team is concerned, but there are a lot of supporters out there, from Newcastle to Southampton, who must feel the same. Southampton have sold their way into a relegation scrap, Newcastle have never quite bought their way out of one, as they should. The idea that a club with 57,000 fans shouldn't expect to be competitive is also fantasy. Says a man who has consistently belittled Newcastle fans in recent weeks for having these exact hopes and expectations for their club. Thanks for your typically balanced reporting, Mr. Samuel. Harry, Leicester. And thanks for your typical level of understanding, Harry. I have never belittled Newcastle fans for their ambitions for a club that should quite obviously be better and more successful. I merely pointed out that this idea that Newcastle are special, and nobody from beyond Tyneside could possibly understand their uniqueness and complexity, is a fallacy. Funnily enough, I was making exactly the same point about the mythologized, romantic view of the East End by West Ham fans, or did you just ignore that bit? It was quite a chunk. Martin Samuel isn't bright enough to be able to discuss existentialism and West Ham. In fact, the very fact that he is talking about a football club as opposed to an individual shows that he is way out of his depth on this one. Better than ever, Wilmslow. Yes, existentialism is an individual concept. The individual, not society or religion, is responsible for giving meaning to life, said Kierkegaard. I was thinking of it more in a metaphoric sense, though, picking up on Solomon's definition as a sense of disorientation, confusion, or dread in the face of an apparently meaningless or absurd world. Anyway, I'm not here to talk philosophy with the posh boys of the Cheshire County set. There was enough of that going on in the NME when Joy Division were around. In the end everyone got sick of it and started listening to ABC Records. Still, capturing the old-fashioned spirit of punk this week, here's Jamie Carragher and Polly. Point 5, how comes it was funny when Spit the Dog did it? You wrote, that little girl must be so proud. Unless I'm mistaken, Martin, I think she was the one who behaved like a grown-up and asked her father to stop. Giles, Thursley. Indeed she was. And, unless I'm mistaken, I pointed that out in the very first paragraph, meaning my final line, the one you quote, was intended ironically. Well, that'll teach me to dabble in the mystic world of subtlety. It gets worse. Get a load of this. What a disgraceful last comment. Maybe you would like to explain exactly what the young girl did. That sort of journalism should see you sacked too, and that comment apologized for immediately. Moynagst, London. Martin Samuel is so determined to defend one of his own in punditry he blames an innocent young girl for being spat on by a millionaire. Carragher didn't react poorly, he behaved like the infantile lout that he is, committing a crime. Samuel, you are a disgrace to your profession. I hope the bosses at DMGT have taken note. Red Devil, Manchester. Welcome to 2018, everybody. These two anonymous twerps are too thick to understand irony when presented with it, so I apparently need to be sacked and then apologize. In that order. Here's Lucy, from Hull, who probably paid more attention in school and quite possibly read a book, or at least the highway code. He isn't saying the girl did anything. He was saying she must be so proud, in other words, not proud, of a father who drives along despite his daughter being with him, not paying attention to the road ahead, more interested in winding his window down, honking his horn to attract Carragher's attention, an illegal act if there is no danger, and using his phone to film it, another illegal act. Maybe you know a primary school pupil who could read articles for you and explain them. Lucy Helt, Hull. You tell him, Lucy. If I could, this column would have a theme tune, something that would play when you clicked on it. And an irony siren. A great big siren that sounded whenever a line that was not intended to be taken literally appeared. It wouldn't sound when you read it, Lucy, or many others. Just for those who would have me sacked for treating the rest of you with a degree of intelligence. Hey ho. Martin, next time you have a bit of banter with someone, do you expect to be spat at? Come on, mate, there is no excuse. Most people would rather be punched than spat on. Stevie Aku, London. No, they wouldn't. I know people who have been punched in the street. It can be life-changing, personality-changing. Spit wipes off. It's horrible, but a handkerchief will sort it out. Like bird's mess. And you're really talking to the wrong person, banter-wise, Stevie. I very much keep myself to myself in the street, and I'm not one for engaging with strangers, unless they've left their umbrella behind, or dropped their Oyster card. I'll chat to people if the conversation is polite, but hooting and hollering out of car windows? That's never been me, I'm afraid. I wonder what Martin Samuel would have written had this been Wayne Rooney. KV10, United Kingdom. Pretty much exactly the same, if the circumstances were the same. The dad was a starstruck idiot who seemed to view the spit as a sort of autograph. Oh. Jamie Carragher spat on my daughter. Nice. Stupid weird man. Carragher is remorseful because he got caught. Does anybody think he'd have been as racked with guilt if he'd driven off never to hear about the family again? He'd have forgotten about immediately. Unfortunately for him, the dad filmed it. Was 69, Liverpool. Agreed, was. Strange reactions on both sides. The dad almost proud he'd got a rise out of Carragher and overlooking his daughter's discomfort, and Carragher doing something that would be utterly alien to the majority of us. Someone said to me, is it his thing? Because it would be such a random act otherwise? All I can say is I've never seen Jamie do it, and I've been aware of situations where he could have reacted aggressively. A few years back, I know he got collared by some Manchester United fans after a game in Munich. Bit like the Eddie Jones situation on the train. Started off nice, posed for selfies, and then it started, really pushing the line with the taunts and the digs. One lad had him round the neck for the photograph a bit too hard. He didn't react then, under considerably more provocation. I really can't say why he snapped this time, I really don't know. Banter has become the catch-all term to cover any form of abuse, just as being passionate is used to excuse poor behavior. It's only banter if it is reciprocated, usually between people that know each other, and is generally light-hearted. If you are taking advantage of someone either because you know that in their position they can't react, or that if they do react you can look around for the highest horse to mount whilst phoning the papers in a faux indignant rage, then it's not banter. If you are filming their reaction with your fingers crossed, it's not banter. This is hardly the showcase upon which to make a moral stand. Dave H., London. I don't think Carragher was being abused, Dave, but I'm completely with you on banter and its motivations in this case. But it wasn't a moment of madness. He could have kept the window shut and turned the radio on. Sam. Birmingham. Exactly, Sam. So that was the madness. Watching the media defend Carragher's indefensible act is fascinating. It doesn't matter how sorry he is. It doesn't matter what a nice bloke he is. This cannot be tolerated and he needs to be sacked. Rich bloke, London. Nobody is defending the act. I think if Carragher was still a columnist for this newspaper there would have been severe consequences and no amount of mitigation would have prevented his dismissal. He has been suspended for the rest of the season by Sky, and I am not going to argue against that. I don't think he would, either. All there has been, from some quarters, is an appreciation of the provocation footballers increasingly endure, not least from opportunists with camera phones. Maybe it is born of knowing the individuals involved, or of having had first-hand experience of similar situations. There is a reason footballers live behind gated premises these days, and it isn't just about money. Martin makes out that banter is a bad thing. It's one of the great things about football. I've had banter with friends, family and strangers ever since I started supporting my team, and I've never been spat at. Base Tito, London. Yes, we've all done that. But it's a two-way street. Both sides have to want to engage. If you're bantering with someone who would rather just drive his car, or read a book, you're a tiresome bore. He's not a footballer anymore, he's an employee of a corporation. No HR department in the world would allow this kind of behavior without bringing disciplinary action and firing him. What will the other 30,000 Sky employees around Europe expect if they spit at someone when they get annoyed? Seegerstemp, London. Well, for a start, if it happened in a private capacity as this did, then that might alter any disciplinary action. We can argue Carragher's celebrity means he is always representing Sky, but the fact is he was on his way home from work at the time. Would a dish installer who got involved in a personal altercation after work necessarily lose his job? I'm not convinced of that. He might be warned over future conduct if there were criminal proceedings, he might lose employment if he went to prison. But are either of those scenarios going to happen here? Equally, the reason Carragher was filmed is he is a celebrity, so, again, his circumstances are different to many of the other 30,000 employees, and that might be taken into consideration, from multiple perspectives. It could count against him, because he is a public face of the company. It could count for him because should the company have afforded him a chaperone to prevent incidents like this? I don't think it is anywhere near as black and white as you make out. Samuel's commentary was of a similar standard to Carragher. Standing up for appalling adult behavior shows how little regard these types have for society. One can't just spit at young kids and be remorseful, particularly when you have been dishing out unhelpful improvement ideas to worldwide football clubs after an average career. There will be consequences. Wren, Portland. So the fact you don't like him as a pundit means the consequences of the spitting should be greater? That's the most stupid thing I've ever heard. Even stupider than this. Until next time.